Hi, this is Dr. Stephanie Wautier, and I'm the host of Conversations with a Chiropractor. This is not a health how-to, but rather a conversation with some amazing people I've had the pleasure of being with on my journey of life. Think of it more like Tuesdays with Maury, a fireside chat, or chicken soup for the soul. Grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and enjoy this conversation with a chiropractor. In this episode of Conversations with a Chiropractor, I sit down and talk to one of the most beautiful women you'll ever know at 80 years old, Ruth. She shares what her life was like in the humble beginnings in Negaunee, Michigan, and then how she soared to success as a boutique business owner in Milwaukee. I think you're going to enjoy this conversation. Ruth, thank you so much for being on Conversations with a Chiropractor.
I'm so happy to be with you, Dr. Stephanie.
So we started talking about the fact that you have given speeches all across the entire United States. In what capacity?
Because I had my own cosmetic business for 30 years, I was able to go out to women's groups, men's groups, and I would talk to them about skincare and health and makeup, of course, for the ladies. And then they would, in turn, sign up for consultations. I'm familiar with talking.
So your business was based in Milwaukee.
Yes,
That is where you built it from the ground up.
absolutely. I did. Thank you.
How did you get into the makeup business?
Let me see how it actually started. I had a lady friend that was judging beauty pageants. And she asked me if I would be one of the judges with her for a local pageant. So I did. And then we got to know each other better, and she invited me to her home, which was in Aurora, Illinois. And at that time, she was a beautiful lady. And she said, Ruth, why don't you take this book and this, it was a long play record, and you listen to it. It was Lee Fine speaking, and it was How to Build a Business. So I listened to that. I read what she gave me, and I listened to that recording over and over. And it was just common sense, more like how you treat somebody, when you have clients, how do you get started in the business? And so I thought, I'm going to try that. And so I started doing it, scared to death, but I didn't have any clients to talk to. So what I would do is I would go through the phone book, actually, and I would look at the streets around where I was working, because I really didn't know many people at that time. And then I would call, and I would just simply say, my name is, at the time it was Borum, pardon me, they're too close. My name, I was married to Vance Borum, and I would call around and I'd say, I'm new to the area. I have a skincare and cosmetic business, and I'd like to welcome you in for a free consultation. And it took a while, but sooner or later, this one would call and that one would call. Then I thought if I speak to groups, maybe I'd get a wider range listening to what I have to offer. And that's what I do. I would look at all the different groups in the area, the women's groups, and I'd call and I'd say, this is what I do. Would you be interested in having a talk about skincare and makeup? And of course, it just mushroomed from there.
Wow.
It did.
So you had a physical building, a physical location.
Yes, I did.
And tell me the brand of this makeup.
Okay, at that time, it was called Vivian Woodard Cosmetics. It was owned by a doctor, Dr. Woodard, and his wife. And they were the product that my friend sold.
The woman who invited you to judge the pageants.
Exactly.
With her.
So what I started doing, like I said, I just started calling people and telling them I had a new business and this is what I do and can I invite you in to try the makeup, etc. And it just took off. It took off. And then I started adding consultants who would sell for me or under me.
Okay.
And became the largest distributor in the United States.
Wow.
I couldn't believe it. Wherever they offered a trip, I would work and work until I would win the prize.
Wow. That's amazing.
It was amazing.
In what year did you start your business?
Let's see. I left home in 1993. Started the business in 95 and was in business for a lot of years. And even though I had to move from one location to the other, the people seemed to follow me. And then I had 2 locations in Milwaukee.
Wow.
One on the north side, one on the south side. And I actually had people helping me with that. So it was interesting. And I was so happy that it worked out that I could do something that I really didn't think I could. You know, you just have to have faith. But the product brought me to where I got. I loved it.
And your skin is beautiful. And
Thank you.
I know when you came back to Marquette that you then worked for Dr. Geisler.
Yes, I did.
So when you went to New York City and Dallas, and when you were giving these presentations, these speeches, what were these groups? Big groups of...
Huge. They were probably mostly people that were there for some type of convention. And one of the groups, which was all male, I remember how scared I was. I'm now talking skincare, not makeup, skincare to men. But it worked out really well, and I was very happy that I was able to do that. But that's how I got my name known and the product, is just by calling groups, inviting them to allow me to speak to their group.
So if you had to tell someone who was just starting out a business, what kind of advice would you give them?
Number one, you have to really believe in what you're going to do or what you have to sell. You can't just sell to sell, and I don't even like to use that word, because selling, like I said, is sharing what you believe in. And if you believe in it, you're going to tell the person the story of why you believe in it and how it will benefit them. And when they see the benefit and then they try it and they see that it really did something for them, they'll start referring people to you. And that's kind of how it got going.
Yeah. And hard work, right?
Lots of hard
Diligence.
work. Diligence.
You probably worked 7 days a week.
Oh, yeah. I worked, and it was tiring, but it was something I wanted to do. And that kind of keeps you going. When you love something, you just work at it, and you just know that somehow, some way, something good is going to happen. And it did. There were many skincare and cosmetic people in the United States for Vivian Woodard Cosmetics. And like I said, I don't care what they offered. I was bound and determined that I could do that. And when I say I mean I had the work ethic to go after something that I truly believed in. And when I'd win trips all over, I've been wherever you could possibly think, but my favorite was Hawaii. And because of my many trips there, I moved there.
Yes. Do you remember what year you moved there?
Let me think. That was probably 1990. Boy, that's a long time ago.
That's okay if you don't remember the
I can't
date.
remember the exact, but I think it was in the 90s.
So you had your business in Milwaukee.
Yes.
And then you moved to Hawaii.
Yes.
So how did you close your business, or what happened with the closing of the business?
Okay. I had another consultant who wanted to purchase the business.
Okay.
She had family in another country, actually. And she told them that she wanted to do this. And they helped her. Not that it was expensive to buy my business, but I told her she had to really take care of those clients as I thought that I did. And so she came on, I trained her, and then I left for Hawaii.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you got to pass the torch.
Yes.
You got to pass the torch.
I did.
Now, we've known each other for like 17 years.
A long time.
A long time.
Yep.
And there have been conversations that we've had, and I don't want to bring negative, but that you've overcome like a betrayal in your business, right?
Oh, yes, I did.
Do you want to talk about that at all?
Sure. I had many consultants, but this one gal that I trained just wasn't interested. She didn't think she needed training, and she thought she knew it all. Okay. So when it came time to sell my business or to pass the torch, she wanted to buy it. She bought it. I didn't get a lot of money for it, but I got enough to move on in my life and help her out. But she just didn't think that she needed training. She didn't think that she loved the product. And it went on, and finally I left. And as it turned out, it didn't work out for her. And then some other gal who I do not know bought it from her. Once you leave your clientele that you've worked so diligently for, and they know you and they trust you, and you give them the service you feel they deserve, and the product, of course, they were a little bit hurt. I could tell that and it's nice. Even a plastic surgeon's wife was a client of mine, and they came to the closing of my business. And it was really very nice. But when I left and she took over, I don't know what she did with it, but it didn't work out. So then some years later, when I came back from Hawaii and my first husband passed, I went to visit her. And she said, I'd like you to come to one of my meetings with my salespeople. And I said, well, sure, I'll be glad to do that. And she was just tall and beautiful, and I was just me. You know what I mean? And when she invited me, I could, looking at all the faces of these ladies that I had no idea who they were, and she started talking to them about how she knew me, how my business enticed her to go on her own. And then she said, I'm going to be honest with you. I really didn't give Ruth a chance to help me in the way that I needed to, which was a compliment. But at the same time, I felt bad because she just she wasn't there.
It's hard because you develop these relationships.
I did.
And you give your all.
Yes.
And you want that person who picks the torch up from you to do the same.
Exactly.
To have that same compassion, relationship, intention.
Right.
And there's only one you.
Well, that is true. We all have our calling. We all have something that if we follow will lead us to what we're supposed to be doing on this earth. And I truly believe that because I have more or less a gift of gab, I was able not to influence, but encourage people to try something that I knew would benefit them.
Yeah.
And sometimes people just think, no, I don't need that. I don't need this. It just was for those who wanted, but it was a good business. And then after I left the business and I moved away to Hawaii, I lived in Hawaii for 5 years. And this is really coincidental. But I was looking for work. And I went for an interview for a cosmetic place. Come to find out, they had started with the same brand I did years before, which was Vivian Woodard.
Wow.
I was just shocked. And so I worked with them for quite a while and then left there and went to work for a magazine called Hawaiian Island Home. And that was I loved it. I could make appointments with all these business people and share with them this wonderful magazine that would truly benefit them. But again, once again, you have to know your product and how it's going to benefit the person. That's very important. Not just to sell a magazine or advertising, but to let them know how this will work if they do such and such. And so that's where I spent the rest of my time in Hawaii.
Now, did I hear that, and hopefully I'm pronouncing this correctly,
Yes.
Galad or Jalad?
Yes.
Tell us about your connection with Jalad or Galad.
Gilad, yeah. Gilad had a television program of exercise. I still have all the repeats because he's no longer doing that, from what I understand. But anyway, I tried to find him where he was in Waikiki and was given the wrong directions. Eventually, I found him, and I told him that I had been watching exercise. I think to his program is when I even lived in Hawaii, which was years past. And I had bought all the tapes. Every tape that man sold, I bought them. And now it's 30 years, and I'm still exercising every 5 days a week from 8 to 8:30 with Gilad. I knew all the tapes by heart. But they weren't hard. He was a common sense person that knew how to get your body moving. That's why it was called Bodies in Motion. It was enough that you got every part of your body exercised, but you didn't feel sore or tired. And I'm quite sure that he's retired now.
But it's cool that you met him.
I
that
did.
You were there in Waikiki at
Yes.
the same time.
Yes.
And you met him.
Yes.
Now, didn't you tell me that he wanted to hire you
Yes.
to work for him?
He did. Oh, that was really special that he did want me to work
Yes.
for him.
Yeah.
But of course, by then I had another job working for the magazine.
Mhm.
But I've kept in touch. I send him emails or whatever. He's,
That's really cool.
I don't think he has taped shows anymore, but he travels. But he used to have once a year, you could go to Hawaii and exercise with Gilad. I never did get to do that. But yeah, I have pictures of him and myself, which was really special for me.
That is really
Yeah,
special.
he was really just a sweet man. Still is, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So no one can see you right now, but you're a beautiful woman. Do you mind telling us how old you are?
I am 80.
80 years
I'll
old.
be 81 in June.
In June.
Wow,
Yes.
June 22nd.
So you were born and raised in Ishpeming, Michigan.
Negaunee.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Negaunee.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your growing up and how you got interested in health and beauty.
Okay. My dad was one of those men who wouldn't allow my mother to wear makeup because somebody might look at her. My mother was a beautiful person with or without makeup and her personality. But when I got to be a teenager, I had acne, pretty bad. And I couldn't seem to get rid of it no matter what product I bought. And at that time, it was pancake makeup, which was really bad for your skin, but it covered. And that's how I got interested in skincare and makeup, of course, But yeah.
Well, when you're a teenager in Negaunee, Michigan, what do you have access to? What was at the drugstores? Just
Basic stuff. And of course, there was, I think it was Merle Norman, but there was another cosmetic, but I didn't like what they were offering. So I used to buy over the counter, and that was it till I moved away from home and started venturing out.
I know you and your mom were very close.
Very close.
And you took care of her in her failing older years.
Yes, I
did. Would you say that your mom was your hero or your best friend? Or what words would you describe to your mom?
My mom, and I think a lot of girls feel this way, my mom had a heart of gold. And she never asked for much because we didn't have a lot to go buy this and that. But my mom was such a good cook, good baker. And after my dad passed, she was able then to attend her church without my dad giving her a hard time. She made sure that every one of us kids were baptized Catholic because she promised the priest that when she married my dad. And then she said, but once the children are grown, they can go wherever they want for church.
For their faith.
For their faith.
Follow whichever denomination or whichever their heart desired.
Yes. And my brother Bob did leave the church when he married his wife, and he is a Lutheran, and he's very active in the church, loves what he does, and the rest of us did remain Catholics. So I would go to catechism. I taught catechism. I just love being a part of the church. Yeah.
Now, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but it sounds to me like your dad didn't allow your mom to do a lot.
No, he did not. He had a good business with his brother, my Uncle Joe. They were in the masonry business. They could build anything you want with plaster. My dad was so talented. So that's what they did until, of course, my Uncle Joe died and my dad retired. But that's what they did for life. And my two brothers helped them all summer.
Oh, they did?
Yeah. Right.
Do you know how your mom and dad met?
My mother lived in Palmer. She was one of, I want to say 12 children, might have been 13. And each child had a job because they had boarders.
Oh.
And that's how they were able to buy what they needed for food and whatever. And my grandmother would, of course, had a room. They'd pay for room and board. Okay? And my mom's job was terrible. My mom's job was to clean the spittoons.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, that was her job.
Wow.
But she also helped my grandmother bake at some point and really took a liking to it.
Okay.
So on Sunday, when church was in their living room, that's how my mother would bake things with her mom, and they'd have different ladies or people in their living room for church. Yeah.
Wasn't Catholic church.
No, my mother was a Lutheran. Yes.
So your mother was a Lutheran and she married a Catholic man.
Yes, she did. And she promised the priest that she would make sure every one of us children would be Catholic, and she'd make sure that we did whatever we needed, First Communion, confirmation, whatever. But the sad thing is, she never saw us have any of that because my dad he just said he didn't want her to go. So she didn't, she didn't make a fuss. But yes, we were all taken care of with our religion.
So your dad was Catholic. Did he go to church?
No.
So he didn't go to church and he didn't want your mom going to church.
Exactly.
But they promised the priest that you would all be raised in the church.
Exactly.
So you all independently went to church?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I remember as a little girl, of course, I'd always walk to church on Sunday morning. I think it was a 10 o'clock mass. And I would just sit there all by myself. And I'd look around and watch different families coming in. And there was a doctor who was my Dr. Knudsen. And his family would come every Sunday with the children. And I'd watch them march in because they were always dressed just so beautifully. And yeah, that's what I did. And that was the days when the priest did not face his audience. The altar was facing the wall.
Yeah.
And
so his back would be to you.
Exactly. Yeah.
Did you have nice clothes growing up?
Not really.
Yeah.
My mother made things for me. And at that time, petticoats were really unpopular. And they'd scratch your legs if you went out in the icy weather and didn't have pants underneath. Regular jeans or something under them. Yeah, my mother made most of my clothes. And of course, that was the days when you starched everything. My mother would starch my blouses that I literally had to put my arms out so she could get the blouse on my arm. And then I didn't want to bend my arm because they'd wrinkle.
It was probably very uncomfortable.
Oh, very uncomfortable. And then the skirts were big, wide skirts with hoops. And of course, living by the fire hall in Nagani, I had to walk down a hill, cross the tracks, up another hill till I got to the city, and then walk to school.
Wow.
It was difficult. I will say it was difficult, but I managed, and that's how it was.
Was it expected that you would go to school? Was it insisted upon?
No. I think it was just something that we did.
Yeah.
Mom said, and we did, all of us kids. My brother, Bob, became a teacher.
Oh.
Yeah, he became a teacher in Republic. And very good teacher, was there for, till he retired. I don't know how many years that was, 20, 30, whatever. And yeah, he was a teacher. My oldest brother actually was a fantastic cook.
Really?
Yes. And when he was hurt in the mine where he started to work, he got hit in the head by heavy equipment. He couldn't work there anymore. So he started taking care of the house and doing the laundry while his wife was a nurse.
Oh?
And then, yeah, poor Ronnie, he just had so many problems with his health. And of course, he died. Probably, I think he was in his 70s.
Okay.
I don't remember. And then Russ was the youngest boy, and Russ went on to Vietnam. No choice. He was drafted. And that was a really rough time for him because he was on heavy artillery.
Okay.
And he had to be on 12 hours on, 12 hours off. So he really lost his hearing.
Okay.
And I would send him those earplugs that you'd put in the shower or when you swam.
Yeah.
But he would easily lose them. But yeah, he had a rough time in Nam. And when he came back, he was just a different person.
Yeah.
He wasn't the same boy.
Like so many of the Vietnam
Depressed.
vets.
Yeah. When he got off of the bus I think it was in California, but I don't know if it was in Los Angeles. When the guys got off the bus to take the journey to their homes, there was hippies at that time. And they would tease the soldiers. It was just beyond. And they would say, "Oh, you're a soldier. You're a soldier. Ha ha, I didn't have to go." And my brother, they teased him way too much. And finally, he turned around and he hit that one guy and knocked him flat on his butt. But all the military that were there watching never did one thing to them because they knew what my brother and hundreds of soldiers like him went through.
Yeah.
And here they're teasing them because they went to war for their country.
Just like learning history with my kids who are teenagers.
Yes.
We read about how poorly the reception was and how controversial it was that we were even involved in the war.
Exactly.
And these poor men, they didn't have a choice.
They didn't have a choice.
There was no choice.
No, there was. And I had lunch with my brothers and my sister about 3 weeks ago or so. And it was the first time I'd seen my younger brother in quite a while. And he couldn't use his arm. And I didn't know that. Nobody told me because I hadn't seen him for a while. And his wife was helping him eat.
Wow.
And I thought, how many boys or men like Russ have been into war and come home in a different state, health-wise, than when they left.
Oh, absolutely.
All these years later, I know that one time down at the Dome, they had the wall of all the soldiers' names.
Oh, the Vietnam
Wall?
The
Vietnam Wall.
Yes.
And of course, they had a trailer there where you could go in and talk to somebody about your loved one.
Oh.
I went into that. He said, "Who is your family member?" And I said, "It was my brother." And I said his last name. And he said, "Russ? I know Russ. I see him all the time."
Oh.
So I knew that he was in good hands. And I wondered how many more are lost because of that particular war, not to mention all the wars.
Did you write letters to Russ? When
I did write letters to Russ. Probably could have wrote more.
Well,
you know how that is. You think you're writing enough, or for whatever the reason, you get involved in other things and you don't write as often. But I know that, yes, I did write him.
Were you still living at home?
No.
No,
you were gone by then. When Russ left for war, I'm trying to think if I lived in Wisconsin, but I remember coming home to visit him before he left. And I have a picture of us sitting on my mother's couch. And when I look at that picture now, it just seems like that was a story. But it was a true story of what he went through and many other soldiers.
And really heartbreaking when you say that he isn't the same person.
No, he is not.
And that he does still suffer depression.
Yes, he does. Yeah, he does. And I'm sure there's many, many stories of that.
Yeah.
He's still the same brother, wonderful brother, kind. His wife is just absolutely wonderful and does a lot for him when he cannot. And she actually had her own health issues, but she's good now.
Good. That's good. We're going to jump around a little bit, and I'm going to go way back.
Okay.
So your grandmother is in Palmer, Michigan.
Was in Palmer.
Now, where did she come from, or where did her parents come from?
Okay. My grandparents came from Finland.
They did?
Yes.
Okay.
And I remember the story told many times by my mother that when they were leaving to come to America, they had to walk to wherever they were going to get on the boat. And I'm sure it was a dirt road. I don't know how far it was. And my mother told me that her parents, my grandmother's parents, were on the road and they kept waving and waving and waving, of course, to their children.
Because they didn't come.
Yeah, no.
Wow.
Never came and never saw their children again.
Oh,
it was the end of that. So, but my grandparents, of course, are buried in the Nagani Cemetery.
Your grandmother was from Finland,
Yes,
came here,
yes.
and did she meet her husband here,
You know,
or were they married in Finland?
I'm trying to remember, and I don't know that I'm as accurate as I want to be, but I think they did marry in Finland and come over on the boat.
Okay.
And they came, of course, after coming through the island, New York, they came to Nagani. I don't know why. I don't remember how. I don't remember that part of the story, but they were really wonderful thing. And I'd call her Grandma, Mumu and Fadi. It wasn't Grandma and Grandpa. It was Mumu and Fadi.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, they were good people. And so was my dad's parents. They died in their 50s.
Wow.
Yeah, my dad had heart, and my grandmother had cancer of the esophageal.
Wow.
Yeah, she had cancer going down her throat. But I did not get to meet them because they died early.
So where were your dad's parents from?
Okay, my dad's mother was a full-blooded Indian
No kidding.
from Canada.
Okay.
And she and her husband, if I remember the story right, came from Canada. I think it was because of the mines. I'm trying to remember if it was for work or whatever. I never met them, but I heard that my dad's father was so full of fun. And when the children came along, he used to dance with them in the kitchen to music.
Mhm.
And of course, didn't live long.
Yeah.
And then my grandmother had cancer that went down her esophagus. But they were both young.
Okay.
And my dad's grandmother would be my great-grandmother, was a full-blooded Indian. And they came, and I can't remember if it was to work in the mines, but it's been a long time ago anyway, yeah.
So your dad was part Native American
Yes.
or full Native American?
No, it was he was part Native American and German.
In German.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah. And so we all got a part of that Indian in us, but
That's
it's getting lesser and lesser. I did know my mother's parents, and I remember when my grandmother died, my mother would call her Mumu. It was Mumu and Fadi.
Mm.
My youngest brother, Russ, was still a baby when her mother died. And I remember going to the hospital up at the end of, I think it's Iron Street in Nagani, and Russ, my youngest brother, was just walking around. We all went to say goodbye to her, and she looked at my young brother and she said, "Goodbye, little Russell." Oh, it was just so sad. And then when she died, I remember my mother rocking him in the living room and crying. And I'd say, I started crying. And my mother said, "Ruthie, why are you crying?" And I said, "Because you're crying, Mama."
Yeah.
No child wants to see their mother crying or hurt like that. Yeah. And of course, Fadi, that was my grandfather, Fadi had a farm in Palmer, big farm. And they would rent, as I said, to other people in their big house. And he was out one day working. I don't know if it was in the yard or what. And he came in and he fell into the kitchen. And my grandmother was talking to him. "Are you okay? What?" He said, "I think this is the end."
Wow.
And he died.
Was it a massive heart attack?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. A good
Oh,
man,
my
but he died.
gosh.
And I don't think any of them were old, as we call it today.
You're 80 and you're remarried.
Yeah.
Your second husband,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
is 96.
Yeah. We'll be married 29 years. Yeah. Coming up soon.
29
29
years.
years. And he was married 40. Oh, I forget with Luella. I think I'll just say 45, but I'm not sure if that's 100% accurate.
And I think it's really amazing how you guys met.
Yes.
So you're married to Vance.
Yes.
And your current husband, Bob, is married to Luella.
Yes.
And Luella works for you.
She did. And that was another story because like I said, I had just moved to the area. Vance said, "I think we should get somebody to help you." So we started interviewing, and Luella came in, and I really, really liked her, but she was in her 40s. Now, you have to understand, I was in my early 20s, and it seemed old to me.
Yeah.
So I said to Vance after she left, he said, "What do you think of her?" And I said, "She is a little bit too old." He said, Not at all. Now, don't you think of 40 today when you're 80? But,
Right.
Yeah, but we hired her. She was the best thing, the very best thing I could have ever done for myself in my business. She was loyal. She was true. She was everything to me.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
so beautiful.
Yeah.
So you knew Bob through her.
Yes.
The four of you would maybe get together or be at work functions or like you knew Bob for years and years.
Yes. Well, Bob, poor Bob. When I would have what I would call like trophy banquets, meaning I'd have a banquet for all the girls that were salespeople for me, and then we'd give out trophies, all different kinds. It wasn't the trophy, it was just what they did that meant something.
Yeah, being recognized.
And I have a picture where Bob and Lou were sitting at the head table with me and Vance.
Oh.
But I didn't really know him. I knew of him, you know. But it's funny that all these years later, there's two stories. Their love story, Vance, and now Bob and mine.
Yeah.
And both of our former spouses died of cancer. Luella had brain cancer. And of course, Vance had colon cancer.
29 years you've been married. So Vance passes and you're still in Milwaukee?
Yes.
Vance passes and Bob is the one to approach you to have lunch or something?
No. Actually, Vance and Luella had a friend that worked at the mortuary.
Oh.
Okay. At the funeral home. And I would go there for counseling after Vance died. It was for people who were grieving. And I got to meet her. And one day she asked me if I would go out to lunch with her, which was very sweet. And we talked and I got certain things off my chest that I was just crying about. And then she said, Luella's husband and I have breakfast once in a while. How would you like to have breakfast with us? And I said, okay.
What are you going to say?
So I met them and we had breakfast together. And as we were out in the parking lot saying goodbye, he said, would you like to have lunch with me sometime when I come into town? Because he lived up north at that time. They had a cottage. And I said, oh, sure. Okay. Because we could talk about things that you couldn't talk to about other people who didn't know your histories.
And who hadn't been through the experience of losing a spouse.
Exactly.
Because how old were you when Vance passed?
He died in 1994. So I was born in 43. So I was probably early 50, maybe. Yeah. And I was just lost. I was completely lost. And I was actually at that time, because we hadn't lived there that long, we stayed with one of his best friends in Milwaukee he had an extra room until we could find a place to move. And Vance was really sick.
Because you guys were living in Hawaii.
Yes, moved back.
He got sick. You came back to the mainland for treatment.
And we didn't have a place to move to, but his friend said, Tony Campanelli, is his name, and he said, why don't you stay with me? Because he was alone. And he said, and when you find a place, and store whatever you have. We had stuff coming by boat.
Wow.
And including our car. We had nothing, no dishes, nothing.
Wow.
Just the clothes that we had. So we stayed with him while looking for a place. And when we finally found a place to move, we then started moving the furniture in. However, Vance by then was so ill, he died 3 days after we moved into that apartment. It was beyond rough.
Oh.
And it was a very difficult time because I lost my husband. I'm now in an apartment I know anything about.
With a man. People may have looked down upon that, or people may have judged you for that.
But as it turned out, my brother and my sister-in-law, again, who live in Nagani, they came, and until I got whatever I needed, they brought me dishes, and they brought me a one of those cookers that you put food into, one of those,
Like a crock pot? No.
like an oven.
Oh, like a toaster oven?
That was
Or-
it, toaster oven. So I was going to put something in the toaster oven to eat. And the stove was right next to that, where my hip touched the handle of the oven. And I had put the oven on, and I went over to put something in the microwave, and all of a sudden I heard,
Oh.
and I thought I was dying.
Oh my gosh.
I was shaking so hard, and my entire body was soaking wet, just absolutely soaking wet. When I realized I wasn't going to die, I went across the kitchen floor, picked up the phone, and called an ambulance.
Because you had been electrocuted?
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
It had gone through my hip and came out my mouth.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. It was like I couldn't believe it. Then, of course, they came with the stretcher, and they're checking my heart and all of that. And then they decided I was going to live. So they put me on a gurney and took me to the hospital. And when I got there, the doctor said, "Boy, you are lucky." I said,
"Oh my gosh.
"What do you mean?" He said, "That shock went through your body and came out of your jawbone, your ear."
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. He said, "You could have died."
Wow.
Well, of course, then I realized, the tears came. Then I was petrified.
Oh, and your husband had just died?
Yes, just
and then you get electrocuted?
Yes, that happened too, yeah. And so as it ended up anyway, I stayed there for quite a while, and when it came time for me to move out of there, because I couldn't be in the place where my husband died. Long story short, I moved again to a senior center, and I wasn't quite yet a senior, but they had met my first husband when we were looking for a place to live. And as it turned out, they took me and helped me rent an apartment, even though I wasn't quite a senior.
Oh.
Nobody knew.
It's really interesting because I never knew you were electrocuted.
Oh, yeah.
We've talked so much about so many things, and I never heard that story.
Yeah. I don't think I really told too many people.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
how scary.
It was scary. It was scary when the ambulance came, and they're checking my heart and all my vitals and whatever, and they said, because it went through and came out your hip, or your mouth, pardon me, came through my hip and went out my mouth, he said, we think you should be checked up. And that's actually when the doctor told me the story of what I had done.
How you had almost died.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
But when you're under stress, as
Yeah.
I was at that time, because as I told you, that wasn't that long after Vance died, I was lost.
Yeah.
I was really just lost. I wasn't thinking what I was doing.
So it's interesting to hear that the mortuary had a counselor.
They did. Mhm.
Was it free? Was it something common?
I don't think.
it?
I'm sure I didn't pay anything for it, but because I had lunch with a friend, and she told me about it. She said, you might want to attend this. And there were other people there, and we each got to talk a little bit about our experiences. And then whoever was heading that would be talking and giving us advice. Yeah.
Sort of like a group therapy
that's
or
exactly.
like a support group.
Right.
That's the
And
word.
it really helped. It helped. But at the time, I didn't even know they had that.
Yeah. You said that you might want to write a book about your life.
I've been saying that for years and years. And when I lived in Hawaii, I took a course. It was a very interesting course. Everybody else that was in this group lived in Hawaii.
Okay.
I was what they call the haole, the white one. And they all
So they were Hawaiian.
They were Hawaiian, and they all worked in the same place. And then I was selling makeup out of this woman's house, and she invited me. Why don't you come for that? And so I did. I did that. And you had to give a talk every week for 8 weeks about something that they would tell you, like whatever it was.
Like your favorite experience or your most scary moment or something like that.
Yes. And so every week I would write. I would just let my hand do the writing. I tried not to think about it. And I just kept writing whatever it was that I was going to give a speech on for that particular week. And I've got copies of all of those speeches. And that's how I got going with writing, because I'd have to write. At the very end, we had to write how this course helped us.
Mm-hmm.
And we had to give a talk. So I actually created a story of how I was born in Negaunee. And I made the story such like I was flying over Negaunee now and leaving home. And I'm looking down at the city. So it's quite a...
So you actually have that short story
already
yes. written.
Oh, yes.
And then for years you've written poems
yes.
You've done these beautiful creations where you laminate the poems.
Yeah, my husband does the laminating.
He does. And I have several of them. And I use them as bookmarks.
Well, I've got a lot of them. And I look at what I have. In fact, I was looking in the drawer where all that is, and I'm thinking I either need to make more of what I have done or find time to allow my brain to write more. Because, as you know, writing is not something you say, okay, I'm going to write a story today. It just don't work that way.
No, you have to have that spark and that.
Something sparks you to write. And when you start writing, at least in my case, I write and write till there's no more to say. And then that will be the end of it. But that's how most of my poems were created, by some happening in my life. I remember one that I have, it was about my mother, and it was visiting her grave. And that I was standing by her grave, tears rolling down my cheeks. And it really was, it was nice. It was nice because it fit my mom. I wanted to let the world know about her.
Yeah.
But I haven't done much of that lately. I'm into other things. I'm doing puzzles and crocheting.
Oh, yeah, you make beautiful washcloths and other things.
Yes.
And what people should know about you is your generosity. Every single time you come here, you bring us, Val and I, a treat.
Yes.
Whether it's a Werther's or a biscotti.
Yes.
Or
whatever I happen to have.
And
doves. Don't forget the doves.
Oh, the Dove chocolate. Yes. And people now expect that from you, right?
I know.
You're like the person who is like the giver of the gifts.
Yeah, there are certain people who know that I will. Like at the grocery store, the greeters at the grocery store, certain ones just know that when I come, there's going to be a candy.
I want to say one more thing about just the fact that the people, like the other women who were your same age, like most of them probably didn't work, like, right? Like you've been like a workhorse your entire life.
That is true.
You had your business, and then I know you worked for Dr. Geisler here in Marquette. Were you born a worker? Was it instinctive? Was it instilled in you?
I think it was instilled because my mom was always doing something. And I would say, Mom, can I help you? And her answer was, Ruthie, look around. There's always something to do that you could help. So the rest of my life, I'm sure Bob doesn't appreciate it, but the rest of my life, I'm always looking what needs to be put away or dusted or whatever, cleaned, laundry. and that's about how it goes. It's a good treat, but it can be where you're always looking for something to do. Now, when I finally do sit down, I fall asleep.
I feel the same. I think that I grew up with jobs to do, with always working, with my dad being a small business owner.
Yep, my dad.
And it is hard for me to relax.
It is.
Would you say it's hard for you to relax?
Would you think, hey, hon? Yeah, it is very hard for me to relax because I don't mean to say that I feel I'm wasting time, but there's things I feel I should be doing when I look around. The thing is, don't look around. And my house is very clean, but it's just the idea, I think, oh, I should make cookies. So I haven't done this for a while. Oh, maybe I'll wash the carpet in the bathroom. You know what I'm saying? I just like to be busy.
Yeah. You're never bored.
No, I don't bore.
So this is a hard question, and I know I'm putting you on the spot, but if you had to have a title for your book, what would it be?
What would it be? That's a good question. Just let me think a few seconds.
Yeah.
It would be something like How to Survive. But yeah, what would my book be called? I had a name for it. Now just give me a couple of seconds.
Sure.
It probably would be, I want to make it not bad. I want to make it like
you don't want to have it have a negative connotation.
No.
Like you wouldn't want it to say something like small town survivor.
Right.
Like you want to always see the silver lining, think about the positive.
Right. So
because your dad was an alcoholic.
Yes, he was. Never once hurt any of us. except with his mouth. Oh, never hugged me.
Wow.
Never had a hug from my dad in my life.
Wow.
Never. And when I would come home, and then as I'm leaving, they'd all walk me out to the car.
Like your brothers?
Yes.
And your mom?
And my dad. And I'd put my arms around, we'd all hug and cry a little bit. And then I'd go and hug my dad, but his arms were straight flat against his side. And he just didn't. But later in life, when my dad passed, I shouldn't say this the way it's going to come out, but everybody was working, including me, because I had a business. But because Bob's wife worked for me, I was able to go and spend time with my dad until he died.
You were.
I was there for his dying breath.
Did you forgive him? Do you feel like there was forgiveness? Or do you feel like you didn't need to forgive him?
I guess I'm sure long have done that but what I really crave, I didn't get the childhood with a dad who was a hugger and played with you. He was so good at everything he did, but I don't know why he was the way, how he's brought up.
Yeah. Did he ever tell you that he loved you?
No, not that I know of. No.
Did your mom?
Yes.
Yeah.
Frequent and often. But when I left home, something really nice happened for my dad. I would write letters because it wasn't like now with computers. I'd write letters. I have a book about 4 inches of all my mother's letters, every one she wrote me from the day she started writing until her last letter, when she could no longer think enough to complete the letter. Okay? But after I left home, sometime later, my dad would go to the post office every single day looking for a letter.
Wow. So you had a big garden, and your dad would sometimes help your mom in the kitchen?
Absolutely. And when we had the garden, at that time, you didn't have the kind of hoses where it could spurt out. You had to put your thumb over it.
I know that about growing up.
And his thumb would be frozen, of course. But we had a whole potato bin for all through winter, carrot. My mother would preserve beet, cherries from our tree. And my dad was a real giver when it came to groceries. We had neighbors who didn't have a lot, and he'd bring them food. He'd always bring them garden food when we had extra.
So your mom didn't work outside the home?
No, she did not.
She was a homemaker.
She took care of neighbors, family. She had a lady by the name of Mrs. Bowes who lived up when you go under the viaduct for Nagani and start going toward the spring. She had a friend there. And every single day, my mother would go there and get all of her blankets and sheets and wash them and hang them on her line and bring them back because the lady had a problem. Yeah, they were always wet.
I cannot imagine a more labor-intensive thing to do.
My mother, she did it, and she paid her a little bit, but it wasn't. It was more a labor of concern and love for that lady.
Yeah, like
Mrs.
being
Bowes.
a true neighbor.
She was a true neighbor. There's no question about that. And my Aunt Ruth, who I'm named after, my Aunt Ruth and my Uncle Joe, my name is Ruth Josephine, my Uncle Joe, they couldn't have been kinder, sweeter, nicer aunt and uncles. We didn't have a car, so whenever they go for a ride and I could go, I'd go with them. Yeah, they were really good to me. And we had this huge barn for the equipment for masonry.
Oh.
And there we had chickens and pigeons.
Oh, pigeons.
Okay. Yeah, we had pigeons in a coop. And we did eat those, and we did have chickens. And I remember one night we heard the fire alarm going on. We lived very close to the fire hall. And we looked out and our barn was on fire.
Oh, my gosh.
Oh, we just had that truck painted. And my Uncle Joe, how we called him, he came flying. And he and my dad, my Uncle Joe was crying and crying because everything that they had worked for, that they used to use, was gone. And my brother Bob and I had just gotten bikes. And they were along the barn and we couldn't get to them. It was so hot. And so we lost our bikes too. Those are just sad stories that happen to people that you remember, but you don't dwell on.
Yeah. And that was in a time where they probably didn't have like insurance.
No.
Like there was no insurance.
No, there was none.
That was going to give you money to rebuild the barn.
No, after that, their business kind of just, my Uncle Joe wasn't doing well. He was having a problem with his heart. And my dad and my two brothers started doing the masonry.
After.
They built all of the sidewalks in Negaunee Street.
No kidding.
Mhm. Yeah.
Wow.
And as far as at Cyrus, as far as I know, hearsay, my dad did, along with my cousin, and he did all the ceilings in those houses at Cyrus.
No kidding.
Yeah. He was busy all summer. I remember that. But my dad was a good heart, good person, good to his neighbors. And the only time that he ever became different was when he drank.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was still the same man, but he would say things that you would never say when you're sober.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know why he would say them. I think he must have had something happen in his lifetime that brought this on.
Right. But he never talked about what it was.
No, I didn't know anything. No, he
Mm.
never did. If he would have maybe talked, we would have all been better off and could understand what his life was like.
Mm-hmm.
But he married my mother when they were 17.
Wow.
Very young. And they lived with my grandparents, my dad's parents,
Really?
for quite a while. My mother helped because Grandma died, and my mother was there, and she did all the cooking for them. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
Would you say that your life has been easier than your mom's? Would you say that your
Yes.
mom had a hard life?
I would say yes. Yeah, I would.
And of course, I would say the same thing, that every generation, their life seems to get a little easier.
And it isn't even just the easy. It's that there's more for us that helps us do the things we need to do. You know what I'm saying? Just take that stupid iron again.
Yes.
You know, now we have beautiful irons that you can squirt and spray, and they're electric, and my mother would have to heat it.
Wow.
And just iron. And then we had a mangle. You know what a mangle is?
I don't.
Oh, a mangle is it's an iron, but it's like a big roller. And you'd put the clothes in, and as they would roll around the roller, they would get ironed.
Wow.
Yes. And of course, don't forget starch.
So was the mangle heated somehow?
Yes.
It was somehow heated.
Electric. Mhm.
Electric.
Mhm.
Wow.
And then, of course, we did not have hot water. We had a wood stove. And so when it came time to take a bath, we would go up to the park and have a shower. Or we would take sponge baths. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Like your whole growing up.
My whole growing up.
Wow.
Almost like a ringer.
It was a ringer washer.
Oh, the ringer.
No.
The wrangler thing? The mangler thing?
Yeah.
Mhm.
What was it
Like-
called?
It was called a mangle.
Mangle.
It came to
Oh my
ironing, like shirts and stuff. My mother did that on the ironing board, but it wasn't an electric iron those days.
I've seen them. My mom used to collect antiques.
Mhm.
So it was like cast iron,
Yes,
right?
heavy.
A heavy
Yeah.
cast iron
Yep,
thing that you heated on the stove. And then
exactly.
it's amazing that it didn't get dirt on the clothes.
No, because my mother would go over it with wax paper
Wow.
or wet rag
Wow.
to keep it clean. And like I said before, she would always, and I'm sure most women did it then, she would sprinkle all the clothes, roll them up, and put them in a basket, but thinking she's going to iron soon. And if she couldn't get to it, she had to rewash them. Some of them would have maybe just a little bit of mold on them, so she'd have to wash them again.
Oh my gosh.
But it was hard for the women years ago.
Yeah.
When you think about our life, and it is different and hard in a different way, but they didn't have nothing that made it easy for them.
No.
When women years ago did their laundry, and it would go through the wringer, and it would go into a big vat of hot water. That was all that rinsed all the clothes you washed that day.
Wow.
So it was really different.
Yeah. And you talked about like your petticoats and like the hoop skirts.
Yes.
And so you must have worn dresses your whole childhood.
Yes.
Was it expected even through like high school?
Yes.
So you were always expected to be wearing a dress.
Yes.
And when did that change?
Probably after I left school, because I
Okay.
remember even in the winter, I wore pants underneath my petticoat. So when the petticoats got really stuck and starched, against my leg, they'd really scratch. So I didn't care. I'd go to school earlier than most people. I had a long way to walk because we didn't have a car. And when I get to the school, I'd go to the bathroom. I'd take those pants off. They were pretty wet. Hang them up and let them dry. Nobody stole them. Let them there to dry till I was ready to go home.
Wow. And you, of course, probably wore boots and then
Oh, yeah.
changed into shoes
Yes.
when you got to school?
But the boots aren't like today. They really didn't do much for you. They were like a shoe boot. So it was a shoe, and it would have a zipper that would go up, just to the end of the shoe ankle. And all the snow could get in to the boot. It was a shoe boot. It was. And then I remember my classmates. There was this one classmate. He was really a sweet classmate. He used to feel sorry for me. And he'd see me trying to dry my skirt. But it was what it was. And cotton, we didn't have heavy pants like we have today.
Yeah,
No,
just basic stuff.
Yeah. So I'd hang out to dry. But I had to go home for lunch. And I don't mean to make this into a sad story, but there's things when you don't have, which a lot of people today don't. All my classmates would have milk at recess. I couldn't. There wasn't money for milk.
Yeah.
And for lunch, I, of course, always went home. I couldn't eat lunch at the school.
Because you couldn't afford to pay for it.
I could not afford to pay for it. My mom always had something, soup and a sandwich or eggs or something for me. And then I'd go back to school.
That was a long trek.
It was a long trek.
4 times a day.
Yes.
So you walked there, then home for lunch, then
back to school, and then back at night. And down from the fire hall, there was railroad tracks. I'm sure they're still there. But I'd go out of the gate and go down the tracks in the top part and go down a hill, which wasn't, it was a hill with rocks and dirt and whatever. Then when you got to the bottom of the hill, you'd have to go across to the road, and there was a creek there with a little bridge. And then I'd go up the hill and then into town and down to school. It was just what it was. I don't think I ever felt sorry for me, but I would like to have. And the bus went right by our yard, and they would not pick us up. We were considered on the outskirts.
You're kidding
No, they would not pick. They would not pick us up
because of the location of where you lived.
Yeah, our house wasn't on a main street. It was near a street, but we had a big lot for 2 gardens and stuff. So they wouldn't pick me up, which I thought I could never understand.
Yes. My goodness, you probably could have walked to a bus stop closer than all the way to school.
Exactly. But they didn't have any. No bus stops. And my mother always called me Yudi. Don't ask me why. She didn't call me Ruthie. She always called me Yudi, and she'd say, "Poor Yudi."
She was being truly compassionate,
Yeah.
or
Oh,
she
my
was
mother
teasing
was.
you a little?
When I worked at Chiropractor Hospital after high school, I worked I did the switchboard.
Oh.
And I did finally get a Ford Falcon. My sister's husband got it for me, actually.
Wow.
They could use for work. And it was a stick shift. Anyway, it was funny that I'd go up to Ishpeming in that, and if my car was not in a garage, it was next to our garage, I couldn't get up the hill. So out comes my mother in a robe and a coat, and we had sand, and she'd put sand all around my tires, and she'd push while I tried to get up the hill. She should have never done that.
Oh.
Yeah, she was my best friend.
Oh.
Yeah, she was a good mama.
So beautiful.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, thank you.
Ruth, I know Bob is probably ready for you to hit the road.
He's probably hungry.
You know what we're going to do?
What?
We're going to end this lovely conversation, but I have a job for you.
Uh-oh.
You have to come up with your book title name, and then I'll add it.
Okay.
Then I'll add it at the end.
All right.
But
I will do that, but I have to think about it.
Yes, you get to think about it. So if you had to give any kind of a closing statement or a closing comment, or what would you say? What would you want to say?
I would particularly, I'd speak to 2 groups. The ones who grew up like me, where it's a struggle, but you push on. And in my case, I kept going on until I had the largest cosmetic business in the country. Now, that doesn't mean I was wealthy, but it meant I trained a lot of people and I had a lot of customers.
And you were very successful.
I was successful at it, but again, it took determination, desire, and work.
And tenacity. You were tenacious.
Very much.
Yes.
And what was the other one you wanted me to say?
You said you're going to speak to two groups.
Okay.
The people who... So what's the other group?
I think I probably want to talk, and it includes my own family, but the younger people who don't seem, and I'm not saying all, but those who just seem lost, or they can't seem to find their place, and it creates all kinds of havoc in their life, that there is a life out for all of us. We create what you believe you will be. If you're thinking negative all the time, how can you be positive? Regardless of your situation. Not saying it's easy. Okay, I didn't say it was easy. I just said you could do it. And that's how I did it. I would look out the window in the upstairs bedroom in Negaunee, and I could see nothing but trees. Trees for probably miles. And I always would say, I wonder what's over those trees. Because we didn't have a car. I wonder what's over there. And of course, I soon found out with all the trips to Hawaii that I was very fortunate to win, and other places as well. I've been blessed. I really have. But hard work and belief.
You've lived an extraordinary life.
I'm very happy that I was with two husbands that loved me. My husband now loves me, and my first husband. And I'm just very grateful.
Perhaps, too, you can give me a poem that I could put at the end of this as well. So not right now on the spot.
I can give you someone. Time is but a moment that we share, a gift from God who leads us everywhere. Now, I don't all remember all the rest of it, but I can call you if you want a couple of poems. I have a drawer full of them.
Ruth, thank you so much for your time and your friendship. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you more than you know. I remember when Dr. Stephanie started her business in Gwen, and we saw your ad in the paper. Was it a Gwen paper or a newspaper? Do you remember?
I don't remember.
Well, I remember we saw it, and that was it. We were going to see Dr. Stephanie. And I think we were among some of your first clients.
I'm sure you were.
Yeah, and we knew when we went there, that was it. There was nobody but Dr. Stephanie, and there won't be. You still are the best. You're a good friend. You're a good chiropractor. You're a good listener. You're everything to us.
Well, thank you.
Very good person.
How blessed are we knowing each other in our lives?
We are so blessed, and I thank God that I have you.
Thank you, Ruth.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, would you please rate it, review it, like, or subscribe? You can find me on social media at wautierwellness.com, Dr. Stephanie Wautier on Instagram, or Wautier Wellness Chiropractic and Massage on Facebook. And I'm so curious where your next conversation will take you.